While we know that Anakin's turn to the dark side rocked Obi-Wan to his core, what was the depth of his despair, and why did he ultimately wish he had simply died whenever he found out the truth of Anakin? Greetings, curious acolytes, and welcome back to the archives. In the recent Obi-Wan Kenobi show, we do learn how the Jedi Master struggles with his feelings towards Anakin, believing that Skywalker's demise into the dark side fell squarely on his shoulders. Kenobi, being a man of humility and responsibility, ultimately took all of the burden and all of the lives lost to Vader upon himself. But beyond that, he believed that he was ultimately the one that turned Anakin, the one that failed him, and this is something that we get to see displayed on screen. But the thing that the show didn't mention was the sheer depth of Kenobi's regret. It didn't discuss Obi-Wan's thoughts when he first saw the security tapes of Anakin slaughtering the Jedi in the temple, how Obi-Wan wished that he had just died instead of training Anakin. So my friends, in today's holocron, we are going to look in the Revenge of the Sith novelization, and look at the expanded scene, emotional state, and thoughts of Obi-Wan Kenobi, as well as his full reaction to Darth Vader. In the film, Obi-Wan watches the recordings in disbelief and then shuts it off, saying that he couldn't watch it any longer. At first, he fully blames Anakin for his turn to the dark side, and only begins to blame himself much later on. But in the novelization, his first reaction was to heap the blame all upon his own head. So let's take a look. Obi-Wan, staring, wished that he had the strength to rip his eyes out of his head. But even blind, he would see this forever. He would see his friend, his student, his brother, turn and kneel in front of a blacked, cloaked Lord of the Sith. His head rang with a silent scream. Fumbling nervously, Obi-Wan somehow managed to shut down the holoscan. He leaned on the console, but his arms would not support him. They buckled, and he twisted to the floor. He huddled against the console, blind with pain. The novel then tells us that Yoda, without any sympathy at all, simply tells Anakin that he had been warned not to look at the recordings. But Kenobi, not listening, simply said this: "I should have let them shoot me. No, that was already too late. It was already too late on Geonosis. The Zabrak on Naboo. I should have died there, before I ever brought him here." Obi-Wan is not thinking rationally, of course, as Anakin's fall wasn't entirely his fault. After he says this, Yoda interrupts him with a sharp reprimand. He tells Kenobi to stop, reminding him that he is a Jedi. Yoda also states that no one can cause a Jedi to fall, not even Sidious. Anakin alone chose his path. Obi-Wan isn't very convinced, and states that he knows why, silently referencing Padme. But Yoda cuts him off again, saying that that does not matter. There is only the what, 2 Sith Lords and 2 Jedi, with Yoda's own implication being that the galaxy wasn't big enough for all of them. This ends the conversation, and they begin to make plans to deal with the Sith Lords. But that's not the end of our conversation here. What I find distinctly interesting is why Obi-Wan said that Anakin was already too far gone as of the time of Geonosis. At first, this doesn't entirely make sense. For sure, Anakin was impulsive and full of fear and anger, but he still could have been saved, right? Not according to Obi-Wan's hindsight, and although Kenobi had no knowledge of Anakin's slaughter of the Tusken Raiders, he would be mostly correct. When we meet Anakin in Attack of the Clones, he is a knot of emotions. The very first time we see him, he is sweating and nervous, admitting to having dreamt of Padme every night since leaving her for the past 9 years. The attachment had already set in and formed, and it would begin to compound whenever Padme's life was in danger. Then, if that were not enough, Anakin began having dreams of his mother suffering and dying. He went to Tatooine only to face down the ghosts of his past life. Upon finding his mother, he only got to exchange a few short words before she died in his arms, and he got his first taste of the dark side energy, slaughtering every individual in the Tusken camp. From that point, his trajectory was set. His emotions towards losing his mother would spur the anxiety of losing the others, losing the Republic, and losing Padme. He would fall in love and intend to marry her. And this is where we get to Geonosis. Kenobi notices the Padawan's ferocious attachment whenever Padme falls out of the gunship. Kenobi spots it immediately, stating that if he abandoned their mission for her, that he would be expelled from the Jedi. It's fascinating that Obi-Wan picked up on Anakin's romantic attachments immediately, as risking a mission to help someone in need is definitely not Anakin's MO. but he only got into superficial trouble because of it. However, Kenobi knew that if he risked the mission for Padme, the Council would immediately know it was because of the romantic attachment. Then of course, the reference of how Obi-Wan watches as his apprentice was so riled up because of Padme that he charged headfirst at Dooku and nearly got himself killed. These memories were likely what Obi-Wan drew from. These were the moments where Kenobi realized he had lost his Padawan forever. Perhaps not on that exact day, but from that moment, Skywalker's fate was sealed. Obi-Wan always knew about Anakin and Padme's relationship through the Clone Wars, but for both of their sakes, he never mentioned it. It was always something unspoken between the two men. But he had been worried for Anakin ever since these events, and many more instances only brought Kenobi more concern. He knew instantly why Anakin had turned to the dark side whenever he gave it a few moments thought. This is why he said that Geonosis was far too late. He then states that he wished he had died at the hands of Maul on Naboo, as this was the time before Anakin and Obi-Wan ever began their training. While Anakin was younger and more malleable, a time when Kenobi could have just not brought him to the temple. A time when he could have defied Qui-Gon's dying wish, or simply have been killed instead of Qui-Gon Jinn. Qui-Gon Jinn was the only Jedi who could have trained Anakin perfectly. He was the Jedi best suited for the job. Their personalities suited each other much better. Qui-Gon would have taught Anakin to embrace his feelings and acknowledge them rather than to run away and lock them deep. Qui-Gon's teachings of how to remain in the present and trust in the living force rather than Obi-Wan's negligent rebukes that simply say, be mindful. Perhaps Obi-Wan realized all of this, and it's why he levied a death wish upon himself retrospectively. But Jedi do not look in the past, they do not look in the future. The answer lies in the present, and in that present, as Yoda pointed out, there were two Sith. Unfortunately, it seems that Kenobi would not be able to keep these lessons in mind during his exile on Tatooine, as he would live in despair while ruminating on his failure, his only redemption coming in the form of Luke. But anyway, my friends, these were Obi-Wan's first thoughts upon the discovery that Anakin had embraced the dark side. If you enjoyed this holocron and want to see more character personality breakdowns or more character thoughts, be sure to leave a comment down below letting us know. Until next time, my friends and fellow acolytes, may the Force be with you.